All right, so here's your puzzle. You've taken an economics class. You drive up to an ATM machine, an automated teller machine, a cash machine, in a drive-thru on the side of a bank. And you notice on the keyboard those little raised bumps, which are braille. Braille is for people who can't see, so they could read by feeling the bumps when they touch them on the keypad. Is there something puzzling about this? That there should be braille keypads at a drive-thru ATM? Now, if you're like me, you're wondering, why did they put braille on an ATM machine in a drive-thru? Because blind people can't drive. Now, you might think of a variety of explanations that are maybe a little good-natured, optimistic, commonsensical, intuitive, or whatever just comes to mind. Possible explanations like, well, the passenger in the back seat was driven there, and they can still feel the machine, or someone could walk up to the drive-through, risking getting hit by a car, or just so that they're not discriminating against people who can't see. But what if you were a good amateur economics student or economist? What might the best explanation be? I'm pausing just for a moment so you can think about it, or maybe just hit the pause button and then come back, because when you come back, I'm going to tell you what the best economic explanation is. Okay, here I am, I'm back. It would cost a lot more money to make two different kinds of ATM keyboards, one with braille and one without braille. They'd be designed differently. They're blueprints for the engineers who set up the equipment to build them and cut the metal in the different ways and everything. Would involve two different sets of designs, two sets of tools, two different conveyor belts and everything to put them together the right way, keep track of which ones had the braille, which ones didn't, and then when they were completely constructed, packaging that identified the ones that were braille, the ones that weren't braille, an inventory to keep apart the braille ones from the non-braille ones, and then a kind of delivery system to make sure that all the braille ones went to places where blind people would possibly be walking and using them and the other ones not. All of that involves tremendous duplication of cost, compared to which you make one set that has the braille on it and you send it everywhere. Saves a lot of money. Wow, if you figured that out, you're a brilliant amateur economist. So by analogy, what I want to do is I hope to make you, and this might be difficult, it's hard to change anyone else. It's hard enough to change yourself. But if I can impart anything to you, if you can, the takeaway from the course after, a month after the final exam and all that kind of stuff, 5 years from now, whatever, you might not remember, was it Plato or Aristotle whose theory that was? Was that, that kind of thing. What was the name of that theory or whatever? Just like the economics teacher thinks, but the students are not going to remember about inflation and unemployment and the inverse relationship between the two and the difference between micro and pico economics and this and that, whatever. So similarly, I hope to not only get you to think like an amateur philosopher, but to notice things, because it's one of the distinctive things about philosophy is noticing things like the drive-through ATM with braille. That's not necessarily a philosophical problem, but it's a puzzle. It's something in the world around you that doesn't initially make sense, that seems to involve some kind of contradiction contradiction in principles, purposes, arrangements. Something just doesn't seem right about it, right? So if you become an amateur philosopher, you will be picking up on things all around you, in you and out of you, in your mind, in others' minds, in your speech, in other people's speech, between your mind and what you say, between what you say and what you do, and all around you, things that don't initially make sense, or things that only seem to make sense when you don't really pay attention to them. My favorite beloved late karate teacher, Sensei Warren K. Little anecdote. We had a student in the dojo, karate school, who used to say kind of really dumb things every now and then. And I wish I could remember one of them. I just don't. It's too many years ago. But I remember once the student had said something kind of really ludicrous. And Sensei said, you know, that kind of makes sense. And while he was pausing, the student like lit up because Sensei never really would always just kind of mock him when he said silly things. He says, yeah, that kind, you know, so let me start all over again. You know, that kind of makes sense. If you don't really think about it. It takes a moment or two for that punchline to kick in and for you to process that, and you realize kind of makes sense if you don't really think about it, which implies that if you really think about it, then it doesn't kind of make sense, right? So one of the things that I hope happens to you by you studying philosophy with me anyway, different philosophers teach it in different ways, is that you'll come to realize that almost everything that anyone thinks, like in terms of ordinary thinking anyway, everyday common sense, kind of makes sense until you really think about it, or as long as you don't really think about it. Sensei K. That kind of makes sense if you don't really think about it. All right, let's move on to the next slide.